Care, Creating Sustainable, Holistic, and Green Societies with Basic Income by Tom Pogson. Read by the author. It is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life. J.R.R. Tolkien. The health of the soil, plants, and animals, and mankind is one and indivisible. Sir Albert Howard. What's this we chanted? What's this we planted? Come on, progeny. Kurt Wagner. How safe are we? Chapter 1. Here as I began creating this work, my province of British Columbia on the west coast of Canada languishes at the end of what meteorologists are calling a once-in-a-thousand-year event. In the same week, climate scientists warned that this could easily become a once-in-a-decade event, or even another example of the new normal. The heat dome weather pattern arrived here in Victoria, where I live, on southern Vancouver Island, from Saturday, June 26th to Tuesday, the 29th of 2021. It brought the temperatures in the capital region past 40 degrees, causing not just extreme discomfort, but hundreds of fatalities in our province. The punishing heat also caused some businesses, such as our famous Butchart Gardens and our University of Victoria classes, and many of our local restaurants to shut completely down for the entirety of the event. It baked not just the province of British Columbia, but the entire Pacific Northwest, affecting over 13 million people from Portland, Oregon to Anchorage, Alaska. Temperatures were higher elsewhere in the province, especially in the interior and west, and the worst being in Lytton, British Columbia, at over 47 degrees. Only a few days later, a sudden raging inferno of a forest fire brought on by repeated lightning strikes, hitting trees and the dry forest floor, burned the town of Lytton to the ground. Images circulated the world of smoldering remnants of homes and the curved, destroyed tracks of a train bridge that ran past a small community on the Fraser River Canyon. An article in the British publication The Telegraph talked about a worse heat wave in Jacobabad, Palestine, where the temperatures went past 52 degrees, people deserting the city streets to find what shelter they could. Electrical at that temperature starts breaking down by both direct assault from the heat, but also from the demand on services, including that of air conditioning. Here in British Columbia, I saw the images of glass below a railing of someone's home had actually exploded from the heat. Lurking beneath the Siberian and Northern American permafrost is a breathtaking amount of carbon and methane, which can be released by the slight increase of around 2 degrees of overall global temperatures. According to 90% of climate scientists, once this train starts rolling, it will be impossible to stop. Our ability to wait and see is not just at an end, but some more conservative scientific predictions have stated we are well past that and is now about controlling what damage we can. The general spirit of combating climate change is all around us. You see it in the rhetoric of most center and left-wing parties. We see it here in Victoria as it's pushed for less car use, such as Car-Free Day. We see it in the push to stop using grocery bags, start using bike lanes, and reduce packaging initiatives. But I also see its blatant counter. I see not only lots of traffic still in this community, a smaller city on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, but a use of vehicles far bigger than necessary. I see inability to not let go of the idea that we need to keep everyone busy, and that work is not just something that needs to be done, but it's placed in a hierarchy of value, demanding that citizens must work harder and harder than ever, produce like they've never produced before, so that way, if they are good people, they will stop being embarrassed millionaires and join the ranks of the better people with the better jobs. Meanwhile, history is full of names of incredible human beings who supposedly failed by financial measurements before the end of their lives. Names like Nikola Tesla, Vincent van Gogh, Nick Drake, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Edgar Allan Poe, Oscar Wilde, Franz Schubert, William Blake, Herman Melville, and Jesus of Nazareth are just some of the names of people who have died in relative or extreme poverty, let alone the extreme poverty that still exists. Not only are full-time workers not making enough, but an ideology has risen around work, as though we worry that our society will fall to pieces without as many people working of working age keeping as busy as possible. We do not see that work and jobs are different things, and that jobs cannot exist without the work that provides for them. There is seemingly shame for those who are not becoming conventionally successful between the ages of 18 and 65. There is an incredible disconnect with how many of those we once called essential workers, keeping us fed and supplied during the initial lockdown of the pandemic, have returned to experiencing derision for not having more successful jobs, or worse, when some in the United States, with the aid of the stimulus package, actually dared to contemplate looking for better options. There's an aggressive mentality towards those who cannot work, even if they have legitimate reasons, such as disability, blatantly visible, below the poverty line incomes in which they dwell. It's the same ideology that has helped trickle down, stand strong despite its obvious failings. The rich can never be faulted for their work ethic, even when their wealth was inherited. This is virtually a return to feudalism, where royalty was seen as somehow connected to the heavens. 40 hours a week was once considered full-time. The idea was that, along with your 2 days off, one of which was the, quote, Christian day of rest, Sunday, weekdays would give you 8 hours work, 8 hours sleep, and 8 hours for what you will. Between the rise of gig work, wage stagnation since the 1970s, and the erosion of non-monetary benefits, we see people working 60, 70, and more hours per week. To combat this problem, people started working more jobs, mostly part-time, zero-hour, precarious. The biggest competition for basic income is in the inherent political, quote, jobs, jobs, jobs slogan of the federal jobs guarantee. In the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes said we'd be working less than 15 hours a week, which was a common idea back in those days. It was amplified by voices like Bertrand Russell in his work Praise for Idleness, and the simplify mantra of Henry David Thoreau. 32 years later, the famous cartoon character George Jetson mentioned on our television sets that his boss, Mr. Spacely, had him on a grueling 9-hour work week in 2062. However, despite the influence of the Jetsons and others, we have convinced our future is otherwise. We have been convinced that we must earn our right to survive in a society that makes surviving without each other's involvement impossible. We are a civilization that is at the point of considering settlement on the planet Mars where hardware of ours is already active, including a working helicopter. We can produce what we need. In the documentary Cowspiracy, a researcher mentions that we presently have the productive capacity in terms of food for 14 billion people, nearly double our present population at 7.875 billion. Of that population, only 0.5% in the global north use 25% of the world's resources. We are already consuming resources of 1.5 Earths. If the global north and global south produced and consumed at the same pace, we'd need 2 or 3 additional Earths. The problem with this has been the discussion of academics of all disciplines for decades and our changing habits associated to the aggressive rise of industrialization. It first emerged in the specific concept as the Club of Rome reports on limits to growth in 1972. The concept, which will be discussed further, is that of degrowth, which is an idea alluded to both in the film Planet of the Humans by Jeff Gibbs and in the book Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, who both explained how our planet has a sustainable threshold that we are already dangerously crossing. Scientists have warned us that a generation has been born that could see the world become uninhabitable before the dawn of the next century. Not only do we not yet have the kind of starships that could give us a necessary exodus from the home we've destroyed, but should we have to get to that place, it's a heartbreaking thing for anyone to consider, no matter which way their view of civilization or politics fall. During the rise of the heat dome, my loved one and I sheltered in our bedroom with our air conditioner. I bought it 2 years ago, when I was already feeling like it was no longer becoming a luxury product to have. Both of us are over 40 and do not have perfect health. Even though we have that machine, we tried extra careful to drink lots of water, doing all of our cooking in the morning, and following all the recommended advice. It was still not easy going. Coming out of the bedroom was like facing a blast of an oven. This was present no matter where in the community you tried to go, with one interesting exception: under the trees in Beacon Hill Park. The situation of air conditioning is not only a fix that more people are considering, it is unfortunate because but a regretfully backwards necessary step, one that will take us from walking off the cliff to sprinting towards it. I say this as someone who has used them, knowing full well the impossible hypocrisy of it. This is according to the book that was part of my research, and one that I recommend, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, 2017 by Paul Hawken. In it, the manufacturing of refrigeration is the highest form of carbon emission due to the manufacturing of hydrochlorofluorocarbons. It is the number one cause of global warming, overtaking the two largest contenders, fossil fuel use and animal agriculture. There are those of us who have no option but to employ air conditioning over fans. Examples of this are the tragic stories such as the seniors who passed away in the Chicago heat of 1995 when they had to keep their first floor apartment windows closed because of the threat of break-ins. There's also the potential of overload, which an electric grid can experience when such energy draining devices turn on simultaneously during wet temperature extremes. While it had to do with freezing temperatures, the early 2021 Texas power crisis is a good example of this, with a general power failure that directly affected food distribution, water distribution, and heating. These shutdowns can affect us in tragic ways, such as the failure of power for essential services such as fire, police, and hospitals, even despite attempts to create backup systems. This leads to the point that soon climate change deniers may not understand which is the difference between climate and weather. One is an overall activity, and the other is just that moment. Climate change can also ramp up and alter things in terms of hot and cold weather. An example of this is the concerns right now over the effect on the Gulf Stream that could bring colder temperatures rather than hotter ones. Therefore, the subject does not go by the phrase global warming anymore. Climate change causes every kind of atmospheric and event and weather pattern to go haywire. Humankind is amazing at adapting to situations, but some things are just a step too far, like large losses of land for agricultural purposes and therefore food production. There is work happening on vertical farming, but so far the current rate of implementation can be more costly, and due to production factors at present, it has a larger carbon footprint than traditional farming. As Delta, British Columbia farmer John Lindrain told a reporter from the Tyee over his cell phone while sitting on his tractor, "We are living in a society where population is growing, but the land base isn't. All the farmland that is being farmed is so valuable we cannot afford to lose it. You can't make farmland. What's there is there." Sea level rise is already happening. It's not just something that is in the future, and its rate has only increased over the past century. If it continues at the present rate, only a few meters would put not just Delta, British Columbia underwater, but Vancouver Airport, lowlands of White Rock stretching past Cloverdale to Langley, BC, large chunks of Port Coquitlam near Pitwanos. Here in Victoria, sections of our inner harbour, such as Dockside Green, much of the Gorge area, James Bay, sections of Dowis Road, Willows, and lowlands of Sandwich Peninsula, such as Sydney, would be threatened by sea level rise. This would create displacement from work and homes, as well as from other essential parts of our communities. With temperatures already seasonally higher than decades ago, the largest ski facility in North America, Whistler Blackcomb, could be in severe difficulty trying to keep snow on the mountains to maintain the heart of their world-class business. It was just over a year ago now that COVID-19 swept across the world, shutting us down and plunging us all into a way of living we never expected. The experience of it exposed the inequalities and showed how we are only as strong as our base, our workers, our health personnel, the people who make sure we are fed and supplied with our essentials. In those early days, we all said how going back to normal was not good enough, before this idea of new normal was taken up by conspiracy theorists. But why was it taken up with such gusto? Something has taken the simplest things and made them polarized. Over the last few years, names have risen into our shared consciousness of people dividing us into opposite sides. Subjects like masks, immunization, immigration are now more divisive than ever. The story of climate change and ways to make sure everyone is economically stabilized also fall into this same suspicion. The challenge is they must be both addressed before it's too late. But it was not always like this. In fact, this climate emergency we face was not only bipartisan, but verified by a very notable conservative. Chapter 2, Not Nature or Carbon. Quote, "We must learn that less is more. We must learn that infinite growth on a finite planet is suicide. It's not carbon that's killing the planet, it's us. If we can get ourselves under control, anything is possible." Jeff Gibbs, filmmaker and director of Planet of the Humans. In 1958, a 30-year-old Dr. David Keeling arrived at the summit of black volcanic rock 3,000 meters above the sparkling Pacific Ocean. Pulling up next to the entrance of Mauna Loa Observatory, surrounded by the quiet of low-lying clouds, he took his briefcase and went inside. Amongst the clusters of white geodesic domes, Dr. Keeling would use the instrument he developed in Caltech years before, after leaving Northwestern University, the first instrument to measure atmospheric samples of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These findings were made twice yearly by Dr. Keeling, in summer and winter. He noticed immediately that the amount does change seasonally, in a way he described as breathing, where in summer it would reduce the amount of carbon and in winter it would gather the amount back again. But soon he noticed the numbers on a yearly level were rising, especially climbing steeply after 1979, which led to the findings being called the Keeling curve, a graph showing the rise of carbon levels from that point onwards. He would be one of 5 scientists in 1965 who would report their findings and their concerns about how our activities were already affecting the climate and the danger of global warming to President Lyndon B. Johnson. The report, called Restoring the Quality of Our Environment, sadly was ignored. Johnson's administration wanting to focus more on visible things like highway litter. Further efforts of drilling into the ice in Greenland and Antarctica show the expanded story. Deep under the surface of both locations, the air became trapped in the ice going back centuries. In this way, like the rings of a tree, scientists can graph exactly what our carbon footprint has been like on the planet since the building of the Great Pyramids. What they found is our planet does warm and cool, the amounts of carbon and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere moving from approximately 200 parts per million, ppm, to 300 ppm, and back again over a period of decades. The warming and cooling on larger scales, like ice ages, was mentioned in an interview with Dr. Fred Schneider when discussing the movement of glaciers. Quote, "Glaciers are dynamic," he explained. "They surge, they retreat. But with what we are seeing in Alaska, it is the rate of activity, hundreds of years versus decades," unquote. The same thing is happening with the carbon footprint in our atmosphere as well, which is hard to withdraw once the carbon is up there. Our present point on the increasing and decreasing of ppm mentioned before should be presently on the decline, and we should be cooling down. Instead, at last count, our numbers sit just below 419 ppm, 300 above where it should be. Humanity has never lived here before. So, carbon is the bad guy? Not necessarily. Carbon, methane, water vapor, and other things in our atmosphere keep us from freezing to death. Our solar system has put us in orbit between 2 potential extremes, outside of the distance of the sun. According to NASA, Mars has a CO2 in its atmosphere, but this amount of shielding against the sun's rays is 100 times thinner than Earth's. So between the further distance from the sun and the less atmosphere, it is freezing cold in triple digits at night. Venus is on the other side, literally and metaphorically. It is the closest to the sun, but it has the densest atmosphere of the 4 closest, consisting of mostly CO2, as well as nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, argon, and others, which make it a pretty toasty 687 degrees Fahrenheit on average. Between our solar proximity, but also our atmosphere, humankind has been incredibly fortunate to have the metaphorical just right bowl of the 3 Bears soup. So carbon is not bad. In fact, it is the thing that it creates growth on our planet. The soil, the trees, the grass, animals, even ourselves have some level of carbon in our general makeup. But the problem is that it works as a form of greenhouse. This metaphor is not technically perfect either, to be fair, as a greenhouse does not allow heat to escape through its glass, but otherwise this is what gives us trouble. And the amount it must move to give us trouble is quite small. The destructive power of climate change is more dramatic than many realize. Only a small rise of 2 degrees in our overall temperature base can set off chain reactions, some of which scientists are worried we are already past the point of no return to stop. Destruction of the coral reefs, like the Great Barrier Reefs, between both the effects of rising ocean temperatures and acidification. 30% were already gone by 2009. This has effects on food chains all the way up from plankton to smaller fish to bigger fish to the food source for millions of human beings. Elsewhere in the world, we are already seeing the loss of entire species. There are shepherds who have worked the same flocks for generations who now do not have any animals because of less and less grassland to keep them fed. In Morocco, young men have seen how the number of natural oases have dropped dramatically while sand dunes continue encroaching on communities. Water in those communities is becoming scarcer, with wells that used to be only 6 feet down having to plunge 21 feet to get what results in salt water. Between this and the crushing heat mentioned before, we risk the conflict inherent in human migration from other countries. Under not just the Alaskan and Canadian, but the massive Siberian permafrost, are carbon and methane, which are on a hair trigger to be released into our atmosphere. Arctic ice is almost completely gone. The sun heating the dark water instead of being reflected back into space. The heating of the water causing the oceans to expand due to heat. Sea level rise is already here. Its effects are being felt in Boston, New York State, and elsewhere where oceanfront homes are already being abandoned. Making people move has already started, a kind of climate gentrification that forces people into areas that push low-income dwellers out as the cost of living rises more. Climate change takes ordinary weather events and just amplifies them. In Louisiana, 5 record-breaking hurricanes hit the bayou in 2020 alone. In total, there were 22 climate disasters in that 1 year. Right now in British Columbia, we have a state of emergency with a no campfire rule that absolutely did not exist when my family used to go to our property south of here on Camano Island for the summer. In their book, Enviromedics 2017, medical doctors Jay Lemery, MD, and Paul Auerbach, MD, go over all the potential health outcomes of climate change, including increases in asthma, allergy, mental health, cardiovascular failure, increase in transmittable diseases, and other ailments due to air pollution, animal migrations due to warmer weather, such as mosquitoes, and of course effects on food and water supplies. Climate change will affect our economy globally, nationally, and locally, just like every other system on Earth. Which brings me to the point I mentioned before. There was one rather famous former English Tory, Conservative Party of the United Kingdom, who took a stand at the United Nations General Assembly 1989. This person held a science degree before going on to become Prime Minister. Her name was Margaret Thatcher. Now, as amazing as that moment was, a clear indication of how politics have changed, it did have a small hiccup within it. Holding the line on the idea of trickle-down economy, like her American equivalent Ronald Reagan and champion, she declared that the best way to tackle climate change was through the unleashing of the power of the free market. What's wrong with this? Put simply, the rise of greenhouse gases started with the Industrial Revolution and followed the level of production, its steepest climb beginning in the late 70s, early 80s, where the effects of the neoliberal agenda of unfettered capitalism began. So while Thatcher made excellent points of how we must work with nature and instead of trying to dominate it, industry that views shareholders' growth and profit above all else is a little like letting dogs off a leash, hoping they do not get into trouble, only for them to immediately bite the first available mail carrier. It comes down to the firmly drilled-in belief that of the gross domestic product being our lodestar. The problem with this is its own creator, Simon Kuznets, saw it only useful during the time of war, when production was the key to survival. In peacetime, he tried to explain it would prove harmful because it would see anything, even things that destroy the planet or hurt communities, as positive. Up until 1971, the world worked under the economics of John Maynard Keynes, often called Keynesian economics. There was regulation and unions. The effect of technology had already begun to have its effect, but as production went up, so did wages. But by 1979, that ideology had been replaced by the idea of getting government out of the market, and indeed anything that would stand in the way of market activity. This is what neoliberalism was. It is not connected to the idea of being liberal, but to do with freeing the market or becoming libertarian like its founders, Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, and others who came from the traditions of the Mont Pelerin Society. But it was not just the effects of this economic way of thinking. Like 100 years had taken us from the Wright brothers' strange flying machine to stealth fighters, times were changing dramatically. We had a rise of technology that was beginning to make jobs disappear. Simply put, global trade in a competitive marketplace, with the governments and unions having power reduced, began the process of stagnating wages while production grew and grew, our carbon emissions growing with them. By the 2000s, the gig economy had begun, the pressure of straining inequality really beginning to be felt by the majority. In 2008, the market had its historic crash felt in America and beyond. The Occupy movement began. 10 cities started to rise throughout the Western world. And in 2010, a Cambridge doctor of economics wrote in page 1 of his soon-to-be explosive bestseller, The Precariat, that if things did not change, the world would see the rise of a neo-populist monster. It should not surprise you to hear, said Guy Standing to his audience at Davos, a place the left-wing economists never expected to be talking, that in November of 2016, I got hundreds of emails saying my monster had arrived. As Professor Standing explained to another audience in Italy, he knew why the famous, wealthy, and powerful of Davos sought his advice. They were all scared as to what was going on. The world in 2015 saw the rise of the hard right that was only made more incendiary by the actual success of Trump's presidential run, along with the success of Brexit in Standing's own country of England. They knew that change had to happen, and Professor Standing, they also knew, was a researcher and economist who had advocated for what had long been called radical change. This idea was the basic income. We used to be seen as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, he explained with a grin, but now suddenly we've become respectable. Like so many things, the idea of climate change has become polarized, as have masks and vaccines in the middle of a pandemic. In this writer's opinion, all these things that have become polarized do so for the same reasons. They all stand against the market. They all look like more economic trouble to solve a problem that possibly does not exist, even when it clearly does, for people who have suffered enough. One of the effects of economic hardship is that it pushes the political ends to their respective corners. The left goes harder left, the right goes harder right. This situation affects mental health, of course. Dr. Upi Aujala, on his Doctor's Kitchen podcast, when he interviewed Guy Standing, explained how so much of what he ends up as a family doctor and in emergency rooms trying to heal is the downstream effects of widespread stress. So surely what needs to happen to cool things down would be something that turns off the economic heat. Our ability to delay, as Swedish activist Greta Thunberg has explained, is at an end. The Paris Agreement of net zero by 2050 does not mean much when the European cities are being ravaged by flooding and the global south are the first in the gunsights of global warming right at this minute. We need to switch to renewable energy sources, but as Jeff Gibbs explained in The Planet of the Humans, we can't just windmill, electric car, and solar panel our way out of this, because to suddenly produce these in the millions would also affect the climate. Within all production is an element of destruction. As Jeff Gibbs also stated, his words dating back to the Club of Rome reports that infinite growth on a finite planet is suicide. The people are unwell, the planet is unwell, it is our commons, and we are its commoners, and both are being starved into lashing out. This cannot last. Chapter 3, Homecoming. This could be heaven for everyone. One of the last vocals recorded by Freddie Mercury. It was a brisk day in London as the old knight climbed the stairs with the bishops and other dignitaries. They entered the great expanse of St. Paul's Cathedral, London, where the young king and his court were waiting. A few of the guards of the child king nodded to the old knight, and he smiled back as they walked towards a tiny figure seated on the giant regal throne that rose high above him. The knight was Sir William Marshall, 1st Earl of Pembroke. After his hundreds of incredible battles and tournaments, history, starting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, would come to label him as the finest knight the world had ever known. He was older now, and his role had become that of a diplomat, mentor, and business person, as well as a friend and right-hand man of both the late Henry II and the late Richard the Lionheart. The child was a 10-year-old Henry III. On November 10th, 1217, he was to give his seal to something he did not really understand. He wanted to go out and play, after all. Along with the updated version of the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, was a single parchment called Carta Foresta, or the Charter of the Forests. This smaller document that would one day make its way to influencing the New World would give every free person access of the land that was the commons, meaning not private, nor not specifically land of the throne, but the heathlands, the wetlands, the grasslands, the forests, of course, and other natural amenities. With this one seal, commoners had enshrined the ability to have basic subsistence of the land. We could lodge on this land without harassment. We could forage the land. We could graze our animals there. We could hunt our food. We could fish. The commons was considered the inheritance of all, like the birthright of each commoner. This same young king would spend the rest of his life trying to claw this back. Indeed, the story of people trying to be able to have their right to exist without punishment or poverty would be an underground, almost silent battle that continues to this day. But in 1516, another name in history would be the first written attempt or written address of this concept. It would be far more to the point to provide everyone with some means of livelihood, so that nobody is under the frightful necessity of becoming first a thief and then a corpse, wrote Thomas More in his book, Utopia. From this moment onward, the idea would slowly gain ground. The idea of all persons having the inherent right to existence, especially as the ability to access the commons, became scarce in an increasingly privatized and enclosed world. In a strange, almost fitting bit of coincidence, the law of the Charter of the Forest ended in 1972 at the same moment as what will be described as the Great Decoupling. During the birth of the United States of America, founding father Thomas Paine produced an idea to address this. His writings, called Agrarian Justice, that would give each citizen £10 sterling on their 21st birthday, the equivalent of $10,000 today, and then another amount later at old age. The idea was to set someone up with the basics to start a decent life, and based on the lack of available land. In his own words, men did not make the earth. It is the value of improvements only, and not the earth itself, that is individual property. Each proprietor owes something to the community as a ground rent for the land on which he holds. This same idea would emerge 100 years later in the inspired writings of Henry George, who believed in a land value tax that could be shared, which he wrote into his bestseller, Progress and Poverty. This made him into an overnight sensation and created a movement called Georgists. One Georgist, Elizabeth Maggie, created a game that could help explain to people why this was better than the present system. She created two versions of the same game. One, a cutthroat land-grabbing game called the Landlord's Game, and the other with a land value tax that was distributed, called Prosperity. Of course, the devil plays the best tunes, so it was the more aggressive game that caught on. Versions of this game started popping up everywhere. In 1904, one version that would soon become national and international. The creator was Charles Darrow, and he paid off an amount that would soon become clearly too little to Elizabeth Maggie. His version was based on his favorite vacation spot in Atlantic City and featured such a locale as Boardwalk, Park Place, and Marvin Gardens. So even though, no, it is not the Go space, but a feature of an older version, Monopoly was based on the idea of giving everyone their share of our commonwealth of resources. It would finally be called the words basic income in the early part of the next century by names like C.H. Douglas, political economist G.D.H. Cole, and social psychologist Erich Fromm, as well as the mathematician Bertrand Russell. It would be a good idea to step out of this history for a moment to discuss the subject of basic income itself. Considering how it is based on a reclaiming of the commons as a form of human right and common justice, and of being an economic program which can alleviate poverty, stimulate the economy, and you can mentally file the idea of basic income as a hybrid branch of both economics and philosophy. In fact, even before the Charter of the Forest, the ancient Greeks, who had created those two disciplines, had a form of basic income in 461 BC. This gave men of their society more ability and incentive to take part in the polis, the politics, and scholae, the Latin derivation of the original Greek word for academic study of the time. It is easy to see the rights-based reasoning here in Victoria as well as Toronto and elsewhere. If you wanted to live off the land these days, it would be pretty tricky. You might have to spend money and take a flight somewhere where land is not yet privatized, but even then that would be a stretch. In fact, just checking for fun, there are 11 places left in the world as of 2017, mostly islands the size of an apartment at best, but there's a little bit of land as of 2019 called Bir Tawil, which has been let go by both Egypt and Sudan as it sits near that border. So with all respect to that area, I don't think that's going to work out for anyone. Here in Victoria, we all saw what happened when people tried to camp on common land, and both the demonization and crime fell on them because people that are in such circumstances are more easily targeted by crime and a not in my backyard stigma. So, as we clearly do not allow people to live by their own means, basic income makes up that difference with enough money to survive and to be able to say no to those who wish to dominate them. Within the study of basic income, there are two primary branches which speak primarily to the question of affordability, even though it is this author's opinion that the basic income is immediately affordable without heavy form of taxation taking money from Peter to pay Paul, as the old saying goes. I believe intrinsically that there is enough money for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. We have the money. Money itself is a measurement and a construct of a system, of our own creation that we can alter anytime we wish. Economists and theorists have found multiple ways to divert cash so that we, in a sense, turned from an increasingly flawed trickle-down to a trickle-up economy where the market is controlled by the people it is meant to serve. Regardless, I turn to two variations that are the most presently dominant. In one branch is the variation made famous by people like Professor Standing, researcher Scott Santens, and most famously, American Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang, the unconditional or universal basic income, also called the UBI. In this Demogrant version, every single person in the country receives an amount of money in cash or equivalent on a regular basis, usually monthly, but it could also be weekly or bi-weekly, of enough money to pay for basic expenses, granting the person enough to lead a dignified life. A wealth tax can be applied afterwards to high-income earners. In the other branch is the variation proposed by Milton Friedman and many others in the 60s and 70s as a way of targeting low-income people and eliminating poverty. This was called the negative income tax by Friedman, but has also been called the guaranteed livable basic income, guaranteed annual income, basic income guarantee, or some other such phrase with the word guarantee in it to signify that no person will ever fall below a certain amount. In this version, a person who makes no income receives the full amount, and then as they make money from a job, the payment is taxed or clawed back in comparison to the paycheck at a rate usually 50 cents on the dollar. Milton Friedman would eventually say near the end of his life that these two programs are essentially two different ways of doing the same thing. It simply comes down to putting a tax apparatus before or after the payment. The benefit to both, compared to the current system of welfare, is that you either always keep the base amount with the UBI or it is clawed back with the GLBI. With this latter version of guaranteed income, if the new employment income suddenly disappears for any reason, the program's reimbursement snaps back to the full amount. With this, the GLBI is much like your television that's always at least on in standby mode, but is still on and ready for when you need it. The advantage to the UBI is it does not do an income test, but sets the amount as a rule. This makes the program the way every Canadian gets a medical services plan care card, or how every 5-year-old is eligible for 12 years of elementary, secondary, and high school education. You get it as a right, not because you're poor, which can single out the recipient. The GLBI is less expensive as an upfront cost and politically easier to pitch because it is only going to people with lower incomes. This takes away some concern that a regressive government could roll out a low UBI, making things worse for low incomes while benefiting wealthy people. Such a horrible version of UBI would be suicide for the government doing it and would solve nothing and should, of course, be denounced. That said, there is an idea floated by Alex Howlett of Boston Basic Income fame of the Calibrated Basic Income, which favors the idea of laying a tax-exempt UBI on top of whatever money is already made. This is based on the straightforward theory that the economy needs people with money. So a UBI is just a more efficient way to inject cash into the system. The amount is calibrated to how much money the economy can handle, which is interesting as you could technically start low and just start raising it until, for any reason, the economy can't handle it. What I find interesting about this is the fact that the starting cost of what in pilots worldwide has been called a partial basic income, not the full amount, makes the cost for trying it not as staggering for a politician to pitch. In Canada, there's not only cross-party support for a less expensive GLBI version that is not seen as a panacea or silver bullet for everything. Most advocates like me do not see it as one, but one that lifts all Canadians out of poverty and gives the most support to low-income persons. It would be a pillar of a new structure going forward, or a floor that we can then put other programs or extra amounts on top of, such as an extra monthly dispensation for people with disabilities. I personally believe that not only is the money there and does not need to be printed, but it is better to create a system with upfront redistributive ideas like a transfer tax, land value tax, capital gains, so we're not trying to chase down wealth, which has already landed in another wealthy person's bank account. I also believe that when a basic income is in people's hands, it becomes their economy and not the corporations, how it was meant to be, going back to the writings of Adam Smith. The people can decide what's best for them, what is healthy, what is sustainable and progressive, with the rediscovered time to finally choose. Returning to the rest of basic income's history, which I'll try to keep brief, the idea continued its underground status going into the middle of the 20th century. It gained support from the left and the right. The United Church of Canada supported guaranteed basic income in those early days, as would eventually many more social groups such as Food Banks Canada and the Canadian Association of Social Workers. It would find champions in libertarian economists, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, 1,200 economists who signed the same petition for guaranteed income in 1968, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke and wrote about the idea as a way to address poverty directly before his assassination, and Richard Nixon, who tried to enact a negative income tax for working families called the Family Assistance Plan. As the basic income was considered inevitable back then, Nixon thought he would be the progressive conservative to make it happen. He got it through the House of Representatives twice, but was shot down both times in the Senate by Democrats who thought it was not enough. Pilots began across America and Canada, which showed positive results, such as a reduction in health costs and increase in economic activity. One of these was the experiment in Dauphin, Manitoba, and in parts of Winnipeg from 1974 to 1978, called Mincome, that notably gave every member of the small prairie town a guaranteed income for 4 years. Going into the 80s, the politics began to shift to trickle-down economics, and there was concern from evidence of some American pilots that it caused family breakups. Truth was, the stats had been distorted, and a few women who had left marriages had used the basic income to flee actual domestic abuse. Despite the quiet of the 1980s around the subject of basic income, the idea managed to hold on in many who discovered it before, such as conservative Senator Hugh Segal, Belgian political philosopher and economist Philippe Van Perijs. This is when organizations focused around the idea started to grow, beginning with the Basic Income European Network, BN, founded in 1986 by Europeans like Van Perijs, Guy Standing, and political economist Klaus Orff, that would become the Basic Income Earth Network in 2004. In the late 90s, professor of philosophy and economics Carl Widerquist formed the North American Basic Income Guarantee Congress with his friend and sociologist Michael Lewis. Moving into the 21st century, the subject around automation started to take limelight more and more. Explosive economic tensions that occurred after the 2008 crash. The dubious beginning to the Obama administration made the decision that would never go well, one where the government of the United States bailed out the people who caused the problem, but not the people who were losing everything, including their homes, because of things like cheap profit and subprime mortgages. Only a few years later, a discussion on Reddit about automation would benefit this cause of creating a floor on which everyone could stand by one of its brightest stars, New Orleans-based researcher and writer Scott Santens. Scott would go on to write and create content on basic income in a way that boiled down the philosophy from different voices throughout the ages, like Thomas Paine, Alan Watts, Milton Friedman, in such a way that its content moved from stuff of debate between economists and intellectuals to something that was much more practical and workable. Around the same time, the next series of pilots began around the world, but this time powered by nonprofits who were genuinely interested in seeing how this would work. One of the first ones being created by Bien in Namibia, with more to come of either universalistic approaches of one-time cash transfers in Liberia, Vancouver, London, India, Kenya, Finland, and in 2017, a group of pilots in Northern Ontario, Canada. This last one gave a sense of pronounced déjà vu for the researcher who had brought the story of Mincome to the world, Dr. Evelyn Forget. Her work, which became Basic Income for Canadians, from COVID-19 to Financial Security for All, 2020, showed how the only people who changed their employments in the Dauphin Project were kids finishing school and young mothers who wanted to extend their maternity leaves beyond 1 month. It also showed, as the book goes into, reductions in health costs at 8.5%. In one talk, Dr. Evelyn Forget voiced her concerns that a pilot or its research could be ended abruptly, like how the newly elected Manitoba provincial Conservative government had done in the 1970s. The findings of Mincome in 1978 were immediately shelved into an office where it would sit until Dr. Forget hunted them down decades later. Sadly, Dr. Forget would again see a change in government bring a basic income pilot's work to an abrupt end. Specifically, in March 2019, Doug Ford, the leader of the newly elected Conservative provincial government, canceled the pilot within 1 week of obtaining office, despite having promised twice to let the pilot run its course. Some of the 4,000 participants found out about the cancellation through the news. Some did not find out until their check that was supposed to be there never showed up. Despite this setback, the truth remains. Basic income pilots around the world have continued to show the same positive results. In fact, the closer the pilot sticks to the rules of UBI or GLBI without adding other conditions, the more pronounced the results become. For example, spreading the recipients across the country along with only giving it to people on income assistance is what happened in the Finland experiment that still managed to yield positive results. The results from Finland were slight employment gain, more flexibility in work options, less stress, greater autonomy, security, less depression, less sadness and loneliness, and more feelings of general well-being. These results are common among the list that came from other pilots worldwide, even the short-lived pilot in Ontario. People not only continue to work, but they actually work more, choose work that they find inspiring and more in line with their abilities. Health improves, truancy decreases, crime decreases, entrepreneurial activities increase, hospitalizations decrease, women's status improves, and as Guy Standing discovered from some of the pilots, such as the one that he oversaw in Madhya Pradesh in India in 2010, the emancipatory value of a basic income is greater than the money value. It frees people up to take chances, he found, giving each person the sense of possibility. It gives them the power to say yes to the work they want to do. It gives them the power to say no to exploitation of any form, including abusive relationships in and outside of employment. There was a claim that basic income would give employers an excuse to pay less. This has been proven clearly false, as we have seen from the rebalancing of power given to workers by stimulus checks in the United States in 2021, along with many other workers' concerns and considerations. Some of these are the still ongoing coronavirus, waiting for a better deal before suddenly re-entering the job market, childcare, and more people recently looking at jobs they were not certain about, that the pandemic has given them the moment to reconsider what they want to do in a changing, fragmented work economy. In this way, basic income gives workers their own bargaining power. It also addresses the technological work displacement problem of automation that has only accelerated out of the wartime-like necessity of using more technology and remote work during the coronavirus pandemic. In terms of the economics of the idea, or simply how to pay for it, which is, of course, another common counter-argument, economists like Guy Standing, Carl Wiederchris, and Evelyn Forget have devoted chapters in multiple talks on the fact that it is affordable and does not cause runaway inflation. Most recently, in Canada, the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis has run the numbers on basic income and has discovered that it has the potential to speed up Canada's recovery from COVID-19, grow the economy $80 billion per year, generating 600,000 jobs in 5 years. As I am for sustainable infrastructure over sheer growth, I see this as a potential to affect the change we need to have happen. Work can be done in such a way that its impact is lessened, the creation of which is a form of work itself. This was mentioned in a segment of John Oliver's show last week tonight when taking on the idea of there being new work. As he explained, it is mixed. There will be work, but it will require a more flexible mindset than the stable 40-hour work week and non-wage benefits of yesteryear. In Alaska, a form of partial basic income has existed since 1982 in the form of the conservative state's oil revenues. The payout, called the Alaska Permanent Fund, is not enough for anyone to live on at an average of $1,500 per person per year, but despite this, there is some interesting findings that can be made. The state has the lowest inequality, not even minor inflation around the time of the payout, and in defiance to the idea prices might go up, researchers like Scott Santons have noted that stores actually lower their prices to try to bring money into their own tills. The thing about basic income is it is a return to who we really are and who we were back when things were not on the economic high wire that we now walk. This is why we went from Keynes saying we would all be working a 15-hour work week by now, and the Jetsons in 1962 with a 9-hour week. Somehow we've been taught to believe we must serve the market, our technology, and the economy instead of having all that serving us. Somehow work has been put on a pedestal, which does not benefit the worker. Like the so-called tragedy of the commons, a theory conjured up by William Foster Lloyd in 1832 in Oxford, which was an excuse by the powerful to enclose the commons, we are made to believe that it's someone else amongst us who is at fault for why we struggle when it's the system itself. We are told to see certain people as lazy, be they immigrants of a different income class, different age group, such as millennials or boomers. This started with lies like the tragedy of the commons that stated that common people are too foolish and too unorganized to not destroy their own land, which was only repeated again in 1968 by environmentalist Garrett Hardin, based on his information solely on Lloyd's, quote, research. As Jason Hickel explained in The Divide, A Brief Guide to Global Inequality and Its Solutions, 2018, the idea of calling people lazy is weaponized against any group from low-income workers to indigenous persons to the global south. So when addressing the classic questions about who is deserving and undeserving of help, a remnant of the Poor Laws of 1834, which used actual violence and death to force people to work when the state decided, about who works and who doesn't, the mistake I think is made is that we have only had this work, these jobs that have been part of the damage actually done, many of which are bullshit jobs, which was explained in the book of the same name by the wonderful writer and speaker, the late David Graeber, who we lost in 2020. The truth is we've always worked. As American economist James Sussman explained in an on-air interview, if you think about it, all life works. Take our civilizations back to their earliest forms. We had to work together. We have neither claws nor fangs nor incredible dexterity. If you put an average human in a cage with the average hungry lion, it is the average lion that emerges picking its teeth. No offense to lions. The idea of us being individualistic entities separated in a vacuum is deeply removed from how and who we are. We all prefer to have our own privacy, of course, but humankind is deeply social and tribal. During the beginning of the 2020 pandemic, like other sudden dramatic moments in history, it showed how when the chips are down, making sure everyone in our tribe is okay is our automatic go-to procedure, as opposed to the veneer theory that as soon as the lights go out, we will all turn on each other. Basic income rewards the most important work, that of forms of reproductive care. It recognizes that all human life has value, and this includes those who do work that is ignored by measures like the GDP. As New Zealand politician Marilyn Waring explained on the TED stage, on the other side of the boundary of protection, there is this extraordinary phrase in the rules, that of non-primary producers. If you do the work of transporting members of your family and their goods, shopping, cleaning, preparing food, cleaning up after, caring for children, caring for other loved ones, doing laundry or ironing, The statistics claim you are at, quote, leisure. American historian Peter Linebaugh has stated outright that in this way, women, and most notably their often reproductive work, referring to the things that Waring stated, and more as opposed to just childbirth and childcare, though that is part of it, is the heart of the commons. He made in one talk a direct reference to the mostly young women in charge at the Standing Rock protests in North Dakota, where young women were not only the prime water protectors, but also ran entire communities' diverse needs, such as medical, administration, and childcare. Like a guitarist who spends 1 hour on stage, but has spent thousands of hours playing chords, scales, and arpeggios over every hour of productive work is a result of thousands of hours of work of care. Without this unpaid work, the paid work of our lives would grind to a halt instantly. The earliest tribes of our different peoples eventually understood that if they wanted to fend off the equivalent threat of hungry lions to keep from killing the tribe, individual members could not go at it alone. So for the best chance, they learned to work together as a team. In this way, the lions were completely out of luck if they tried to attack. When it came to hunting and, yes, warfare, our warriors and our hunters would be the ones to go out and defend the village or make the kill and bring the bounty back to the community, who would share it across every member because every member was part of the whole and still considered valuable. In this way, basic income is not a derivation or radical. It is actually a return to our better instincts of cooperation and sharing. From learning about the subject in online sources and books, since these have been my primary sources over the last year of the pandemic, I have learned from every walk of life, from every political group, and every social class that people find something from their angle that they like about basic income. The report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls has stated its importance in the call to action. Famous top entrepreneurs have come out for it as they have seen how technology will make jobs obsolete. This was the work of people like the late Gerald Huff, who worked at Tesla and wrote about and talked about what he saw coming. There are also many people who cannot work for no fault of their own, but who either end up on disability or are unable to obtain the slightly higher incomes of disability, which still place a person in poverty. Just because someone cannot work, which I hope I've made clear, does not mean they cannot contribute to our society. Most of our actual productivity comes from machines, and even sales are now moving over to machines with things like the Amazon Go store, where you swipe your phone to enter, take what you want, and leave. The software knows what you took and charges you on the way home. It really comes down to what is the future we want to see happen. Over the last 30 years of my working life here in Victoria, I have seen a worrying trend. I saw work go from paying a competitive wage with full in-house 100% dental, pharmaceutical, and even life insurance. I have seen our homeless population go from just a few to a few thousand, not counting the people who are the hidden homeless, sleeping on friends' couches, becoming reliant on favors from family and friends to make ends meet. This is not okay, and if nothing changes, this trend will simply continue. As British epidemiologist Richard Wilkinson explained on the TED stage, inequality affects all of us, not just those in poverty. Basic income upstream is superior to gates and fences, alarms and extra police, bigger health budgets, and less trust downstream. We pick the future we want. Do we want Mad Max or do we want Star Trek? It is like the African idea of Ubuntu, which states, I am because you are. Basic income lays a foundation below our different national and one day even global households. It is a trust that declares, I give this to you because it is yours and I trust you. It creates a feeling of belonging to the whole. In black and white terms, you can actually see, not just believe in, as an abstract concept of citizenship. I'm reminded of Dr. Susan Simard's work, Finding the Mother Tree, 2021, in which she discovered that our forests are not made up of competitors, but of a supportive community. It is as though the natural world has been quietly teaching us from every blade of grass, from within the chlorophyll of every turning leaf, the truth of our heritage, our connection, and our family. You are one of us. You belong to the commons, and it belongs to you. Chapter 4, Making the Connection. We can have an economy that is focused on making lives better for people, or we can focus on just keeping everyone busy, like canceling a tractor and giving everyone shovels. Scott Santens, writer and activist. Care is self-actualization through the investment, growth, and development of others. Milton Mayeroff from On Caring, 1971. In the Rocky Mountains of Basalt, Colorado, stands a sleek, shiny new office building. It is a 2-story, 15,600 square foot office building that is insulated with an 83 kilowatt solar photovoltaic system that produces more energy than the net zero building needs. Called the Rocky Mountain Institute Innovation Center, it also boasts a state-of-the-art heating, cooling, and water systems, all focused on efficiency. The actual glass of the building can change tint to help control temperature in warmer and cooler seasons, and the entire building is designed to make as much use of natural daylight as possible to reduce electrical need. This is just one example of what is possible from the pages of Paul Hawken's book Drawdown, which goes over specifically what are our greatest problems and what is producing carbon, methane, and causing the problems that we must face in order to hope to survive. The Earth itself will always survive, but the survival of life on Earth clearly depends on our actions. Another example from the book of a community-level initiative comes from the solar settlement of Freiburg, Germany, where a rooftop solar panel project gives the community a high positive energy balance, making it almost year-round detached from the grid. For myself here in Victoria, I do not have to look far to see how the connection wants to be made, but cannot completely reach it in an age of pipelines, big oil still getting hundreds of billions in subsidies, old growth logging, thermal coal, and most visibly, people paying those climbing prices on gas, often fueling up giant-sized trucks and SUVs. A contentious issue here on southern Vancouver Island, along with our rising problem with homelessness due to poverty and people coming to our city to try to find both housing and, more importantly, climate you can survive, is our Mayor Lisa Helps and her initiative to put in new infrastructure of bike lanes and other things to move Victoria towards the future. This is not going to be an essay attacking our current mayor, as sadly our town has its own partisan divide on the subject of mayor and council. I believe that many of the ideas are good, while others leave me less convinced. But that is a normal situation any mayor would find themselves in. From my perspective, it would seem as though Helps has found herself the incumbent in an age of rising homelessness across the Western world, and with climate change and the rise of the precariat. I cannot vouch for her. I can't vouch for her reasoning, but one thing she may have felt responsible for was creating the Victoria of the future that has to emerge. I just feel that for that to work, everyone must emerge with it. A report in the Vancouver Sun by Jill Tipping, CEO of the BC Tech Association, revealed that our biggest industry in British Columbia, despite our belief that we're primarily a resource source, is the service sector. This sector is notably targeted by developing automation as well as streamlining and, understandably, online purchasing. Returning to Victoria and its bike lanes, the construction of these new divisions in roads and entire systems has been for a decade now a source of frustration for those who drive in Victoria. This is because motor vehicles are still the standard in business, with the use of bicycles a newer, technically better in some ways, but desired, but not yet fully reachable goal. Many of these initiatives, like bike lanes, community-centered amenities, speak to the concept of a 15-minute city, an idea from ancient layouts with the goal of placing all weekly activities within 15 minutes of your front door. An overall idea popular in degrowth, a new vision for where we must go next in our journey. Like Paul Hawken of Project Drawdown said on the stage in a talk, within every problem is a solution in disguise. Learning to work with the earth instead of trying to dominate it through industry brings us into an actual relationship. This is the part about the idea which I wish to inspire amid a present that may seem impossibly dark. With basic income, we can set a simple floor beneath each person as a base and foster the idea of learning to slow down and live sustainably. In this way, we can become as any other system or cycle in nature, so that we not only emerge alive in the year 2100, but we've actually taken our civilization to the next level. We become like a rider and his steed, or his or her steed, like a samurai and a katana, like the old sea captain who knows the vessel that he calls his lady. We, the human race, and her, Mother Earth, can develop a deeper relationship that takes us past sustaining to really listening to like the nuances and effects, to the actions and reactions from our activities. It is like we begin to listen to the heart of the earth. We can feel it in the topsoil. We can see it in the clouds. We can see our world for the mindset of abundance, that there is more than enough for everyone, instead of the mindset of scarcity that puts us as not a community, but as independent competitors. Like Sting sang in his song History Will Teach Us Nothing from the album Nothing Like the Sun, 1987, the constant fear of scarcity, aggression as its child. The concept of basic income is suggested in nearly every chapter of Degrowth, Vocabulary for New Era 2015, compiled and edited by Giacomo de Isliza, Federico de Maria, and Giorgio Callis. One point amongst the in-depth chapters of this book is that the longer degrowth economics is delayed in favor of the current model of endless growth, the steeper level of degrowth will have to be for us to survive. This is now glaringly clear as the International Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, formed by the United States in 1988, just released their report during the final edits of this manuscript, that according to 200 scientists, we humans are responsible for climate change and that drastic action must be taken. Degrowth is a way of sensibly slowing our economic metabolism, getting more from what we do, and emphasizing the work of care, which is our most vital. Also called a steady state economy, which was mentioned also by Adam Smith, it aims towards well-being over endless production, quality over quantity, especially considering that despite our level of production, which towers over where it was 50 years ago, we have not necessarily become that much happier. Degrowth, like basic income, has many names throughout its history connected to its legacy, like William Morris, the arts and crafts movement of the 1860s, and Leo Tolstoy. Put simply, we all saw what happened, even for a moment when we had no choice but to slow down at the in the spring of 2020. Places like the northern Indian state of Punjab experienced a drop in pollution, so much so that they saw the Himalayas for the first time in decades. In Los Angeles and other places around the world, we saw smog lifting as we reduced our overall activity. It did not last, of course, because we had only hit a pause button. But for a moment, as Michael Moore stated on his Rumble podcast, Mother Nature sent us to our time out. We were taught again how we are not masters of the world, but organisms dependent on the success of other organisms in our biosphere. Obviously, we cannot work at the no activity level of the lockdown, but we also cannot use the wartime measure of GDP to send our combined civilization off the proverbial cliff. Scientists said that the 5% reduction in 2020 was great, but still short of the 7.6% needed to stop the overall dangerous threshold of 1.5 degree rise in global base temperatures. Considering this disparity of 2.6%, we cannot just tinker around the edges of how we change things. I'm reminded of when the horse was taken over by the internal combustion engine. The early designs look like a carriage with the horse missing. It was not until visionaries like, whatever we might think of him, Henry Ford, that the entire idea was shaped into what we now call the car. Like this, we need to completely re-envision a new way of living on the earth, not just a fewer plastic bags and a few more electric cars. At the same time this is happening, we have people who are working jobs that do not necessarily always need to be done, or are driving around to multiple jobs per day. This makes their ability to really take part in the much-needing slowing pace of bike lanes, 50-minute cities, shopping local, and other sustainable or environmentally conscious concepts only fanciful or maybe one day kind of thoughts. We want the majority to do things beyond this too. We want, such as changing buying habits, eating habits, making decisions as to what is actually important or of real value. We could invest in making our homes net zero. In production, we could decide not only what work is desirable, but what to produce, as we would not feel the need to, we have to produce something even if it's not good or worse, just because we have to make money. An example of this was the anti-poverty program in Indonesia that resulted in a 30% drop in deforestation because the people did not have to do something they knew was not environmentally good just to make ends meet. IPCC findings have stated that 20% of greenhouse gases are derived from deforestation alone. This obvious tragic conclusion that plays out is that making ends meet no matter what just makes it that much harder to survive for the same struggling people in their own future. It literally is the opposite of paying it forward. In Canada, we have over 3.2 million of our own people living in poverty, many of which are working more than one job. I have seen clips of young couples, working Canadians, who are clearly well-spoken, educated, have done all the things we told them to do while growing up, abandoning their apartments for the last time to try to find some other way of living in whatever vehicle they happen to own. It's become its own concept called van life or car life, where people make do with a large vehicle as a home, some who make quite well organized and maintained. But of course, even the most enthusiastic advocates have stated it's an interesting way to see the world, but it's not without hiccups. Something like this should be an interesting project or an adventure, not how someone is forced to spend the rest of their lives because being in your own home is permanently out of your reach as a working person. This situation is for too many is simply damage control when they know they will never see the inside of their own home. They know they will be living below the poverty line no matter what they try, and they can only set about the goal of making that reality as painless as possible. Even with the lobbyist side of politics and all the blatantly frustrating things around certain issues, it always seems to me this reality as the foundation of all activity is simply going to provide us all with more polarization. And like climate change, I am worried as to where it all might lead. Do we really want to go out like this? Our civilization simply ending because we couldn't trust each other, pointing fingers and saying they did it to our tragic bitter end? I refuse to believe this is our future after centuries of so many great lights in our human achievement. Like the opposite direction of basic income, poverty just makes everything harder. As many people struggling within its slick, black, towering walls have explained, it is a full-time job all by itself, with the daily amount of work one must do just to stay alive, let alone to make anything resembling forward progress. Money for bills goes into past bills, like you were living in 1 month ago. As soon as you begin to see your next income as the thing that will do it, that becomes that next income's death warrant, because it means all the money will not last longer than a few days as you make those demanded minimum payments. The world of payday loan makes this situation that much more horrible, but tempting, as we are often hopeful creatures, and sadly, some to our own people's detriment. As Rutger Bregman noted, struggling financially is like a computer running 10 heavy programs at once. Poverty can cause people to lose mental bandwidth, the equivalent of 13 to 14 IQ points. This is comparable to drinking heavily or losing a night's sleep. Freeing people up to think would give everyone more space not only to do what must be done at a grassroots level, but to allow them to pursue ideas on how to set a better course. Maybe there is something else we had not thought of that is even more sustainable, but it takes a bit of work or effort that most would say no to right now. We want people to make better choices, but it is like asking them to solve a complicated algebra problem hanging from a rope over the brink of Niagara Falls. Even if the algebra problem is important or solvable, they have other things on their mind at that moment. Poverty does not, and I say this with the most respect to anyone below the poverty line as someone who's been below it themselves, it does not lead automatically towards morally high grounds. As Anthony Robbins said in the Personal Power series, whenever I see poverty, I see crime, I see lack, I see people doing things and justifying it with, I had to survive. Even Alfred P. Doolittle from My Fair Lady explained it, saying, no, poor men like myself are not in a position to be moral. Basic income would take the threat of having to make horrible choices away. The idea that work saves us from vice is confused here. Being out of poverty, out of lack, keeps us from falling farther. Work is something we will always do, as we always have. A financial floor is a thing that, as the character Brian Quigley said in the BBC Irish Ballet Kids Angel drama, it's the thing to keep you safe and warm. Living in poverty, you do not have the luxury to think ahead. You're in a boat drifting towards the brink of that waterfall. So when it comes to what to eat, what to do with your time, and how your overall focus is placed, it can only be on the right now. This naturally sets those in poverty to fall in some unforeseen way. This, along with the other social determinants of health, is why the concept of income dictating health is a basic concept in the study of sociology. Basic income would especially be needed if things start getting harder than they already are with climate change. 46% of Canadians cannot afford an unexpected $200 expense. Expenses that can be caused by loss of land, food shortages, other financial requirements to deal with a changing planet could be too much for too many. One trailblazer that already exists in this comes from, of all people, Dolly Parton. The famous singer and actor created the My People Fund that gave $1,000 US per month for each family that lost a home from December 6, 2016 to May 2017, the last payment being $5,000. 900 families received the amount. In a report from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, the cash payments were considered the most helpful support at 65%, with item donations at 27%, and emotional support at 11%. There are many ideas as to what people could do on a local level for sustainable living. One is called permaculture, where small to large agricultural practices can work more within natural laws of nature system of species interaction than more commercial ways of farming, such as producing only one product en masse. One is regenerative agriculture, which is a variety of other methods in farming that, like permaculture, looks at practices that keep carbon in the ground, such as not tilling the land. And the familiar idea of composting, the idea of using cover crops to avoid erosion. There's carbon farming, which is the idea based on the concept of sequestering greenhouse gases from the air and farming in such a way that few are produced to create carbon drawdown. These ideas deserve, and of course they have, entire books of their own and are just part of the story of how we must shift our economic system. We must move from the linear make, use, destroy to the natural cyclical method of make, use, renew, so that it comes back around to the start for repurposing, recycling, and other practices of green sustainable development. At the same time, we're in the middle of what is called the fourth industrial revolution, where more and more of our work is being replaced on a physical level that has the capacity to feed the world. More and more, we develop the technology to grow food through better sustainable methods, get everyone the things they want and need with little human intervention. But what we must do is create a foundation where people can volunteer for what work they wish to do to help with creating this sustainable future. As I said before, if someone cannot work or will not, which basic income pilots do not point to, and they may be contributing in some way beyond simply being an agent of activity in the economy, then that's not bad, as reduced activity is certainly better than the overwork direction of our current trajectory. It is absurd that those in the precariat, gig concierge economy are trying to climb to the numbers of 90 hours a week to goodness knows what, how many hours a week, because of our current system expects from them. The first interview question of every job is, why do you want to work here? I'm fairly sure the answer isn't supposed to be, who cares? I need more work. I mentioned this on social media, and Floyd Marinescu, CEO of C4 Media, angel investor, and founder of UBI Works, said, I would never hire someone who said that. If people work a job that they voluntarily, genuinely, in their heart want to do, then everyone benefits. The customers have service from somebody who is actually into what they're doing. The boss has a wonderful team, and the employee feels like they're doing what they love. There's also the idea that's been around for a while of a carbon tax, but with a connection that is targeted towards the largest polluters, and that along with other funding sources, this could be used as a way to pay for basic income through a carbon dividend, something already happening on a small scale here in British Columbia in connection with the goods and services tax. This is far better than the concern over the idea of consumer targeted carbon rationing, though that is a concern for the future if we're going to keep going with fossil fuels. Even though it's logical, politically trying to make something like carbon rationing work would be much harder to sell than using a dividend and giving people the positive choice, not negative punishment. Anything that affects our commons naturally should be included and not be harmful to low-income persons. As I'm creating this work, a piece just came out from ScienceAlert.com that nearly 14,000 scientists are warning that Earth's vital signs are rapidly worsening and we need to ban fossil fuels, protect biodiversity, and carbon sinks. With a basic income in place, automation and gig economies become workable. Let's say you get your basic income tomorrow and you're in the gig economy. Rather than racing through 4 gigs per day, you can ask yourself, what do I want to do? Perhaps there's one job nearby that you really like, but it's hard to make the connection to it. While he was mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs created the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, or SEED. This was a $500 a month basic income for 125 residents for 2 years. Mayor Tubbs founded the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, inspired by both Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's writings on basic income and on how the 2-year Stockton pilot had improved lives, and showed that with basic income, people like Guy Standing has echoed, they work more, and when they work, they're more productive and energetic. Michael Tubbs said, poverty makes it hard for people to be fully human. You should not have to fear a birth in the family because of money. You should be able to live life properly. Get off your phone, play with your kid. You should be excited for a child being born. With a basic income, 15-minute city ideas and other progressive ideas become far more reachable. You can go to work by bike or transit or even on foot because you could reduce your workload. In a degrowth format, work could be shared, so you do not need to work a 5-day, 40-hour or more working week. Your week is now more open. You're not as stressed, which improves your overall health and those around you. You could stop by the local grocery store or your favorite place on the way home. You could choose better. You could choose to buy better quality items over cheap items, so there's less overall production, especially by the most environmentally damaging companies that make short-term or planned obsolescence goods. You could think, let's try buying some food that's good for both good for us and good for the earth, as opposed to the choice that you know is probably not. You could shop local, which our own Prime Minister Justin Trudeau suggested last Thanksgiving, as opposed to having to go to the big box store, which invariably means more driving unless you happen to live above one, in which case, great. As I alluded to, it makes ideas like a 4-day work week actually work without any concern about loss of income or loss of income for support workers in the current system. In fact, the idea of a reduced amount of office time, a reduction in the time of one career forever, is not only happening, it's becoming some people's actual choice. This is not only because it is interesting, but it has been shown people are more effective in shorter bursts of work than grinding away at the grindstone for hours a day. As a musician and researcher, I learned that sitting on your seat for 4 hours does not necessarily mean 4 hours worth of output. As the old "where there's a will, there's an A" school program that I took back in the 80s said, as hours drag on, the actual focus and productivity goes through the floor. One thing that's often tabled as a counter to basic income is the idea of the federal jobs guarantee. The problem I have with this is, can you guarantee, and why would we want to guarantee something that does not need to be there just to keep everyone busy? And it holds to the desperate belief that somehow we can find a way to make all the effects of what happened to jobs since the Great Decoupling in 1972 just disappear. We still hold to the great again belief that we can just somehow fling open a door and suddenly it's the equivalent of 1973 with great union jobs everywhere. Work can and should be optional, flexible, sustainable, so that the doing of it has little impact on our environment as possible. We should move away from the unsustainable mentality that every last one of us must make extreme efforts to prove themselves via production and actually allow themselves to just simply be. As Scott Santon said, "You're a human being, not a human doing." The most incredible creativity often comes at us from a kid in his parents' garage, from a guy sitting at a cafe with a laptop, from someone on their time off. Home is where our dreams are made. Like George Thorogood said in his song "Get a Haircut and Get a Real Job" in the 1992 album Haircut, I'd sit and listen to my records all day with big ambitions of when I would play. As a musician that has played shows, me, and entertains audiences myself, I can tell you that in those early days, no one looks amazing. But one of my most profound experiences as a musician was not necessarily playing some big venue, though has been wonderful. It was playing a senior's home. A worker at the residence told me after the gig, do you remember that one fellow who was clapping along the whole time? That is the first time that resident has moved his hands or done anything like that. You cannot put a price on that. It has nothing to do with conquering the world or showing how much better I am than this person or that. I'm not against competition, and that is a fun part of our culture, but the prize should not be being able to come home. Returning to musicianship, practicing, developing to a place where you can perform takes time, and this is not something that immediately looks productive. This reminds me of something I read years earlier in a guitar book. It was a quote by Andy Summers of the band The Police, saying, "People think a guitarist can pick up his instrument for the first time and make the universe sound like it's crying and singing, but it's not like that. We all start with scales and chords. We all start with the possible and build towards the impossible. Creativity is not only the domain of the fine arts." Richard Stallman, open source software creator, explained how, if anything deserves a reward, it is social contribution. In his 2010 book, Life Was What You Make It, Peter Buffett talked about how his dad, Warren, and his family friend, Bill Gates, they took a train across mainland China. Warren said to Bill, looking over at the migrant farmers in the fields, out there could be the next Bill Gates, and we'll never know. Whatever you think of the sentiment, he is not wrong. Too many people in poverty trying to get by are cut off from being able to show the world their true potential. If this all seems extreme, we must stay focused on the fact that we are up against an extreme situation. We are still going through the different variants of the now ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, uncertain what will happen within the fourth industrial revolution, and every crisis in history has been a trend accelerator in changes of work. With the existential threat of climate change, there are people alive today that are worried they will not live to retirement age because no one their age will be able to. We do not have decades to make this change. Massive change must occur before this decade is over. This is the point that is being shouted at us by the 2021 IPCC report. A basic income would help with what Ellen Kelsley talked about in her book, Hope Matters 2020, that, like Chris Jordan said on his talk on the Sustainable Human YouTube channel, we're better off if we don't despair at the size of work and how it seems too much for us to handle. Having income security could give people breathing room to believe there is possibility. It gives the ability and the mental bandwidth to decide what is the best next step to take. As I stated before, with a basic income, people could choose products that are more sustainable, the decisions made by the majority. It reminds me of the project of animal protection from young people, Jane Goodall, called Roots and Shoots. The name comes from how sheer force of all of us can force even the biggest obstacles aside, like how roots and shoots of trees and grasses can push solid concrete out of the way. I suggest an entirely new branding to this idea of future work, returning to the spirit of the Charter of the Forests, or as Heather Menzies titled her book, The Reclaiming of the Commons, 2014. I recommended calling it simply Commons Care. The commons are, as Guy Standing explained further than I ever could in his amazing book, The Plunder of the Commons, 2019, our natural world, but also our developed world, as we share a heritage that we have both the rights and responsibilities to protect how we can. In the fashion of this, versus a bureaucratic program, each person will have autonomy. This gives each citizen, each commoner as we are, the power of choice. This gives the dignity of choice. That gives people the thoughtful, unjudged ability to decide where their specific and individual role fits. Like Jesus himself said, we should do our good works in secret. If you are wealthier, you could take a shorter work week and decide how do you want to give it back, especially if you are a UBI beneficiary. This is not to say you would have to. Again, the rule that each person decides for themselves. Within the work of Commons Care, supported with a basic income, we can each pick projects we want to help on, whether it is refitting of buildings for net zero status, developing new systems of power, for including in-stream hydro that does not cause giant reservoir flooding, or whatever works best. It could free up the creativity of not just the arts but the finest minds, considering many young people today have ideas that we have not heard about yet, and on maybe fighting climate change better, store electrical energy in ways we do not know about, or other forms of potential drawdown. Basic income gives each citizen the ability to prioritize the best version of themselves. It makes thinking of the future truly possible. We, from the mighty roots and shoots of our communities, can take a large-scale combined action to fight climate change, ensure each person can aim for a better future, a stronger community, and a brighter tomorrow. There is no question anymore. Our shared future is job one. Thank you for listening.